Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite coffee shop in downtown Atlanta, scrolling through your phone, when you overhear a conversation at the next table. A young mother is telling her 5-year-old son a story while they wait for their order. Once upon a time, she begins, there was this clever little rabbit who always got into trouble, but somehow always found a way out. Now, hold up. Before I continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever heard a story like this? About a smart rabbit who outsmarts bigger, stronger animals? Of course you have. Every American has. But here's what's going to blow your mind today. That story isn't American at all. What if I told you that the story this mother is telling her son right now in this Atlanta coffee shop is actually older than America itself? What if I told you it traveled thousands of miles across an ocean, survived hundreds of years, and carries secrets that most Americans have never even imagined? You might be thinking, come on, it's just a rabbit story. But stick with me for the next 15 minutes, because by the time I'm done, you'll never hear that story the same way again. Let me take you back to that coffee shop. The little boy is listening intently as his mom continues. So this rabbit, he's walking through the forest when he sees this big, sticky tar baby sitting right in the middle of the path. Wait, did she just say tar baby? You know this story, don't you? The rabbit tries to be polite, says hello to this tar figure, but it doesn't respond. The rabbit gets angry, punches the tar baby, and gets stuck. He punches with the other hand, gets more stuck, kicks with his feet, totally trapped. Then along comes the big bad wolf, or fox depending on who's telling it, ready to eat him up. But here's where it gets interesting. That little boy in the coffee shop? He's about to learn the same lesson that millions of American children have learned for generations. The rabbit is going to use his brain to get out of trouble. He's going to trick the big bad wolf into throwing him into the briar patch, exactly where he wants to be. Please don't throw me in the briar patch, the rabbit begs in the story. Anywhere but there. And what does the wolf do? Exactly what the rabbit wants. Throws him right into those thorns where the rabbit escapes, laughing all the way home. Now, here's my question for you. Where do you think you first heard this story? Was it from your grandmother? A children's book? Maybe a Disney movie? Whatever your answer is, I guarantee you're wrong about where it really came from. Let me tell you what happened to me 3 months ago that changed everything I thought I knew about American stories. I was visiting my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Johnson. She's 92 years old, sharp as a tack, and has lived in Georgia her whole life. I was helping her clean out her attic when I found this old, worn-out journal. "Whose is this?" I asked. Mrs. Johnson's eyes lit up. "That belonged to my great-great-grandmother, Sarah. She was born into slavery right here in Georgia." Now, I've got to be honest with you. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to read. As I carefully opened those yellowed pages, I found story after story, written in beautiful handwriting. And right there, on page 15, was the tar baby story. But it wasn't quite the same. In Sarah's version, it wasn't a rabbit at all. It was a spider named Anansi. Hold on, you might be thinking, a spider? That's completely different. But is it really? Think about it. Both are small creatures who use their wits to outsmart bigger, more powerful enemies. Both get into trouble because of their curiosity. Both escape through cleverness, not strength. As I kept reading Sarah's journal, I found something that made my hands shake. At the bottom of the page, she had written, "Mama told me this story came from the old country, before the ships. She said Anansi watches over us, teaches us to be smart when we can't be strong. The old country, before the ships. Do you realize what that means? This story didn't start in America. It traveled here with people who had no choice in the journey, people who brought nothing with them except the stories in their hearts and minds. I spent the next 2 weeks diving deep into research, and what I found changed everything. That tar baby story? It's not American folklore. It's West African, thousands of years old. And that clever rabbit who every American child knows and loves? Is actually Anansi the Spider, one of the most important figures in West African culture. But here's the part that'll really get you. The story didn't just survive the journey from Africa to America, it transformed. And the way it transformed tells us something incredible about the strength of the human spirit. Picture this. You're on a slave ship in 1750. You've been torn from everything you know, everyone you love. You're heading to a place you've never seen, to a life you can't imagine. You have no possessions, no weapons, no way to fight back. What do you have? Stories. You have the stories your grandmother told you under the African stars. You have the wisdom of Anansi, who taught your people that being small doesn't make you powerless, that being clever can save your life. But here's the thing. When you get to America, you can't tell the story of Anansi the Spider to your children. The slaveholders are listening. They don't want you remembering your homeland, your culture, your strength. So what do? You adapt. Anansi the Spider becomes Brer Rabbit. The African forest becomes the American woods. But the message stays exactly the same. Use your brain. Be clever. Survive. Think about that for a second. These enslaved people took their most precious stories and disguised them so perfectly that even today, hundreds of years later, millions of Americans tell these stories without knowing they're speaking words that once whispered hope in the darkest places. But wait, there's more to this story that'll absolutely blow your mind. The mother in the coffee shop has finished her story now. Her little son is grinning, probably already planning how he's going to be as clever as that rabbit. She packs up their things, and as they're leaving, I hear him say, "Mommy, tell me another Brer Rabbit story in the car." Another Brer Rabbit story. Do you want to know how many American stories are actually African? How many times you've heard the wisdom of African ancestors without realizing it? Because what I discovered in Mrs. Johnson's attic was just the beginning. That journal led me on a journey that revealed something incredible. America is full of African stories. They're hiding in plain sight, woven so deeply into our culture that we don't even see them anymore. But once you know what to look for, you can't unsee it. And that's what I want to show you next. Remember I told you about Mrs. Johnson's great-great-grandmother Sarah and her journal? Well, that discovery sent me down a rabbit hole that lasted 3 months. And what I found will make you question everything you think you know about American storytelling. 2 weeks after finding that journal, I'm sitting in the library at Emory University, surrounded by dusty books about African folklore, when I stumble across something that makes me literally gasp out loud. The librarian actually shushes me. I'm reading about Anansi stories from Ghana, and there it is, written in academic language. The Anansi narrative served as coded resistance messages during the period of American slavery, teaching survival strategies while appearing to be simple children's tales. Coded resistance messages. Let that sink in for a moment. Those Brer Rabbit stories you grew up with? They weren't just entertainment. They were a secret language. A survival guide passed down through generations of people who needed to stay one step ahead of danger. But here's where it gets really crazy. I start connecting dots I never saw before. Think about every Brer Rabbit story you know. What's the pattern? A small, seemingly powerless creature consistently outsmarts bigger, stronger opponents who want to hurt him. Does that remind you of anything? Any historical situation, maybe? The rabbit never wins through force. He wins through intelligence, through understanding his enemies better than they understand themselves. He survives by being clever, by knowing when to run, when to hide, and when to make his move. Now imagine you're an enslaved person in 1800s Georgia. You're telling this story to your children, and you're not just entertaining them. You're teaching them how to survive. You're showing them that being small doesn't mean being helpless, that their minds are weapons their oppressors can't take away. But wait, there's more. Last month, I met Professor Williams at a conference on African American culture. She spent 30 years studying the connections between African and American folklore. When I told her about Sarah's journal, her eyes went wide. "You found a first-hand account," she asked. "Do you realize how rare that is?" She invited me to her office, and what she showed me next changed everything I thought I knew about American culture. "Look at this," she said, pulling out a map covered in colored pins. "Red pins are places where we've documented African spider stories. Blue pens are places where Brer Rabbit stories were most popular in America. The patterns matched almost perfectly, but Professor Williams wasn't done. "Now look at this," she said, showing me another map. "These are the ports where slave ships arrived, and these are the plantations where the highest concentrations of people from spider story cultures were taken." Again, perfect match. "The stories followed the people," she explained. "But here's what most people don't understand. The transformation from spider to rabbit wasn't random. It was strategic." She leaned forward, her voice dropping like she was sharing a secret. "Spiders in West African culture are sacred. They're wisdom keepers, almost godlike figures. But in America, calling something spider would have been too obvious, too connected to African religion. Rabbits, though? Rabbits were safe, familiar, American. Think about how brilliant that is. These people took their most sacred stories and disguised them so perfectly that their oppressors actually encouraged the storytelling. Slaveholders loved hearing the harmless animal stories. They had no idea they were listening to resistance training. But Professor Williams had one more surprise for me. She pulled out a recording device. I interviewed a woman in South Carolina last year. Her great-grandmother was born in 1885, just 20 years after slavery ended. Listen to this. The voice that came through the speakers was old, fragile, but clear. "Grandmama used to tell me, 'Child, when you hear about that rabbit getting out of trouble, you remember that's us. We always find a way.' The rabbit knows something the fox don't know. The rabbit knows he's going home." Going home. I had to pause the recording. Did you catch that? The rabbit knows he's going home, not just escaping. Going home. What did she mean by that? I asked Professor Williams. She smiled sadly. Home wasn't just a physical place. Home was freedom. Home was a world where being clever mattered more than being big. Home was the dream that kept people alive. But here's the twist that really got me. As I dug deeper into this research, I realized that Brer Rabbit stories weren't the only African stories hiding in American culture. They were everywhere. Have you ever heard the song "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot"? Most Americans know it. It's practically a national hymn. But did you know it's based on an African spiritual tradition about ancestors coming to carry souls to freedom? The chariot wasn't just about heaven. It was code for the Underground Railroad. What about the phrase "jumping the broom" at weddings? That's West African. It came here the same way Anansi did, in the hearts and minds of people who refused to let their culture die. Even our American folk heroes have African DNA. Look at John Henry, the steel-driving man. He's got the same spirit as Anansi, a regular person using strength and cleverness to overcome impossible odds. The story structure, the moral lessons, even the way the tale gets told, it's all connected to African storytelling traditions. But here's what really blew my mind. Last week, I was watching my neighbor's kids play in their backyard. They were arguing about a game, and one of them said, "Don't throw me in the briar patch," and ran away laughing. They didn't even know they were quoting a 1,000-year-old African story. But there they were, playing out the same scenario that helped their ancestors survive. The story had become so American that American kids were living it without thinking. And that's when it hit me. This isn't just about one story or one tradition. This is about something much bigger. Something that changes how we see America itself. You know what? We need to talk about what this really means. Because what I discovered next is going to change how you see every story you've ever heard. So here I am, 3 months deep into this rabbit hole, pun intended, and I'm starting to see America differently. Everywhere I look, I'm finding pieces of Africa woven into the fabric of American culture so seamlessly that we don't even notice them anymore. But then something happened that made everything click into place. Last Tuesday, I'm at my nephew's elementary school for his holiday program. Kids are performing different cultural stories from around the world. There's a group doing a German fairy tale, another doing a Mexican legend, and then this group of third graders takes the stage. "We're going to tell you the story of Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby," announces 8-year-old Marcus, wearing construction paper rabbit ears. I'm sitting there thinking, oh boy, if you only knew what story you're really telling. But then something incredible happens. As Marcus starts the story, I notice the kids in the audience. They're not just listening, they're participating. They know exactly when to gasp, when to laugh, when to yell, "Don't do it, rabbit." These children, from every background you can imagine, white, black, Hispanic, Asian, mixed, they all know this story. It's living in their bones the same way it lived in the bones of enslaved children 200 years ago. And that's when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. This isn't just about one African story surviving in America. This is about how America really works. This is about how cultures don't just exist side by side. They blend, they merge, they become something new while keeping the essence of what they were. Think about it. How many American things can you name that aren't actually borrowed from somewhere else? Jazz music? That's African rhythms mixed with European instruments. Barbecue? African cooking techniques applied to American ingredients. Even the banjo, one of the most American instruments you can think of, came from West Africa. We love to talk about America as a melting pot, but we usually imagine that as different groups arriving and then becoming American. What we don't realize is that American itself is largely made up of pieces from everywhere else, especially Africa. But here's what makes the Brer Rabbit story special. It's not just that it survived, it's how it survived. Let me tell you about something that happened just last week that'll show you what I mean. I'm at the grocery store, and there's this young dad with his toddler having a complete meltdown in the cereal aisle. The kid is screaming, throwing himself on the floor, the whole 9 yards. Other shoppers are staring, judging. You know how it is. The dad kneels down and says, "Hey buddy, you know what? You're acting just like Brer Rabbit when he got stuck to the tar baby. He got all mad and made his problem worse. What should he have done instead?" The little boy stops crying for a second, thinking, "Used his brain?" "That's right. So what are you going to use?" "My brain," the kid says, wiping his nose. And just like that, the tantrum's over. They walk away holding hands, the dad explaining how being smart is better than being mad. Do you see what just happened there? That father didn't know he was using a 1,000-year-old African teaching tool. He probably learned that story from his parents, who learned it from theirs, going back generations. But in that moment, in a random grocery store in America, an ancient African wisdom tradition just helped a modern family solve a modern problem. That's the real magic of this story. It's not just that it survived slavery, segregation, and centuries of cultural suppression. It's that it kept working. It kept teaching. It kept helping people navigate life's challenges. And here's the part that gets me emotional every time I think about it. Right now, today, there are millions of Americans who think they don't have any connection to African culture. They'll tell you their families came from Ireland or Italy or Poland or wherever. But every time they tell their kids to be clever instead of forceful, every time they root for the underdog, every time they believe that brains can beat brawn, they're channeling African wisdom. The stories of Anansi became so American that they belong to all Americans now. That brilliant spider who taught people to survive by being smart, he's not just in the hearts of African American families anymore. He's in the hearts of every family that believes a small person can overcome big obstacles through cleverness and determination. But you know what the most beautiful part is? The people who brought these stories to America, people like Sarah, whose journal I found in Mrs. Johnson's attic, they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They wanted their wisdom to survive. They wanted their children to remember that being small doesn't mean being powerless. They wanted future generations to know that your mind is a weapon no one can take away from you. And look what happened. Their stories didn't just survive in the African American community. They became part of the DNA of American storytelling itself. They're in our movies, our books, our TV shows. Every time Hollywood makes a movie about an underdog who wins through cleverness, they're telling an Anansi story. Every time an American kid learns that being smart is better than being mean, they're learning from African teachers they'll never know they had. Think about the stories you tell your kids, or the stories you remember from your own childhood. How many of them are really about small, clever characters outsmarting bigger, meaner ones? How many times have you rooted for someone who won through brains instead of brawn? Congratulations! You've been participating in a 1,000-year-old African storytelling tradition. So the next time you hear someone tell a Brer Rabbit story, or any story about a clever underdog, remember where it really came from. Remember the people who carried those tales across an ocean in their hearts. Remember that some of the most American stories we tell are gifts from people who gave us their wisdom even when everything else was taken from them. And maybe, just maybe, the next time you're facing a problem that seems too big to handle, remember what Anansi taught us through Brer Rabbit. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the greatest wisdom. Sometimes being clever matters more than being strong. And sometimes the briar patch, the place everyone thinks you don't want to go, is exactly where you need to be to find your freedom. That little rabbit your grandmother told you about. He's been showing Americans the way home for centuries. The question is, are you ready to follow him?